Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast, everybody. Here we're interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we will be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the journeys of our guests so that we can all better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Today's guest is somebody who lives and breathes leadership with heart and data combined. Jeremy Stockdale is the CEO and founder of YLead, a leadership consultancy he started in 2020 to help organizations develop purpose-driven and human-led leaders. Before founding YLead, Jeremy spent 2 decades at Barclays, leading large, diverse teams across UK and Africa, and developing a real passion for people, leadership, and gender advocacy. With a career that stretched from local branches to international transformation projects, Jeremy brings a rare mix of real-world experience, business acumen, and a deep belief in curiosity, compassion, and continuous growth. Since leaving life in the corporate world, he's been working with businesses around the world, delivering leadership programs and speaking on gender unity, allyship, and inclusive leadership. Outside of work, he's a slow but enthusiastic runner, a loyal Chelsea fan, which we will definitely not be talking about, and most importantly, a proud dad to Phoebe and Toby. I'm really excited to have him on the show today. All right, Jeremy, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast. Mega to have you with us today. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good, thank you, James. As we're recording this, it's a Friday afternoon. I'm about to go off to the mid Wales coast for the weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm thrilled to be on your podcast. I love the work you do.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us. Like you're going to hit the kind of the key topics of this podcast from so many different angles. I think we're just going to have to like boundary the time that we talk about. For the benefits of the listeners, we just started to get onto a conversation around football and supporting two rival teams, and then we got into immediately a cultural conversation about those football teams. So we couldn't help but kind of get into the work. Anyway, given the nature of the kind of the experiences you've had and the variety of experiences you've had, both kind of professionally and personally, I just kind of wanted to start with a really big and open question around purpose. And actually just how do you make sense of purpose? Like, what does it mean to you when you think of it, either philosophically or conceptually? How do you make sense of it?
I think where I am now, very much in the second half of my life, because I'm 55, so I know I've gone past halfway. It matters so much to me. It's almost kind of it's everything. If you have a sense of purpose in your life, then it guides everything else. I also feel that if you don't have purpose, no matter what else you've got, it can be really difficult. But I've sort of stumbled across this through life experiences. There's been various stages in my life where I've kind of almost by accident thought, this is my purpose.
Yeah.
And it kind of then evolves over time. But it's really in recent years I thought it's everything. Yeah. Having that real sense of purpose and how that guides other things you do. It plays a massive part in me and my life. And I try and talk about it to other people as well, as some of the work I do with organizations.
Well, so like 3 things already here. Like one, the stumbling experience and where it kind of like has shown up. Then this conscious shift into it being really significant and meaningful. And then this being and now I bring it to others, and the kind of the transition between the 3. So I'm wondering if we can start with the beginning really, and just give us a sense of where and how purpose became really prominent for you. What were the situations and circumstances that you found yourself in that kind of were confronting in a way that you're going, there's either an absence of something or a presence of something that felt important?
Yeah, so a great question. So if I think back to my corporate career, because I spent 27 years working for a large banking organization, which I joined in 1992. And I think there were a couple of moments sort of midway through my career that started to really make this make sense to me. The first one was when my daughter was born 22 years ago. So that I remember what my sort of mentor at the time saying to me. He was a former boss, but he was someone I always went to for advice and guidance. I remember him saying to me, "What does ambition mean to you?" And I'd never really thought about that before. I'd just always been ambitious. And
Yeah.
ambition meant kind of moving up, just moving up the ladder in a big organization. But within the context of having a daughter and having these new responsibilities, it did make me really think about it much more broadly. So that
Yeah.
was a pivotal moment.
What was it?
And
What was it
yeah,
about your daughter kind of coming into the world that created
mm,
that, like, that experience for you? What were you feeling in that moment that made you kind of lift your head up and start to pay attention to that?
I mean, I was feeling many things. I mean, I was feeling tired. I was I was feeling kind of a bit overwhelmed by it all, as both my wife and I were, and this kind of profound sense of love and responsibility that kind of came from nowhere. Normally when you people come into your life, love might grow. I mean, but with this, it's like, oh my God, this is the most important thing in my life, and but no, we both felt the same way. So that's creates a very profound shift, I think, in parents generally. And I started to think about how that might impact my work. I remember I approached my boss at the time. We were doing quite a lot of work around flexible working. And I sort of jokingly said to him, I saw a list of all the things you could do. We're having a sort of a workshop. And one was a 9-day fortnight. And I said, well, that sounds quite good. Could I do that? And he said, yeah. And so we did for a
Yeah.
while.
So my question to you is around what was kind of happening for you in that moment that kind of made it quite significant
Yeah.
and kind of confronting the meaning bit.
Yeah. So I think it just made me realize that my life had suddenly broadened significantly from what it was before. I was very fortunate to have met my soulmate, a good 10 years before, and was very happy and stable in my relationship. And I was building a very successful career that I was really appreciating and enjoying and felt valued and all those things. And then suddenly there's this whole new sense of responsibility that kind of came in. And whilst we obviously knew what we were planning and we had 9 months to kind of prepare for it, the enormity of it was quite significant. And
Yeah.
so it just made me think more broadly about my life and what was important to it. And hence, making sure I had time to be around for her and to be present and to, be involved in things and experience fatherhood.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Because what I find really interesting is, there are everybody has a kind of a different parenting kind of experience when you're in that moment and you're kind of, I use the word confronted because as a father of two as well, I'm not sure you can ever get your head around what's going to happen until it happens. I mean,
Right.
as you say, there's like a 9 month lead in, but I got to be honest, my wife was doing all of the heavy lifting, literally, in all of that. Like I had nothing to do apart from making sure that she was okay. And then in the reality of them coming into the world, there's a whole bunch of stuff to start to kind of focus in on. And so your reaction and response to that was to see more. Like there was a broadening of perspective,
Yeah.
like a broadening of horizon, and that's not always the same and for everybody. And also I hear this like desire to want to invest and to be present and to think about what might the opportunities be around
Mm.
around doing that. That's not always the case
No.
in terms of the impact of that experience. So what do you think it was for you that made it really meaningful to the point where you were willing to change the kind of the BAU almost in
Yeah.
that moment?
Well, I'd love to say it came from a very deep sense of conviction, and I think it was probably just more a reaction to the circumstances I found myself in, and I've tended to be someone that will just be quite go, oh yeah, that's what I need to do, right? As opposed to having thought it through quite deeply.
Yeah,
Sometimes that kind of reckless abandon can be really positive.
yeah,
It can also have negative, sort of downsides as well. But I think it was quite instinctive that I just wanted to. I think I just felt expanded. I felt
yeah,
more grown up. I felt more responsible. I really, up until that point, felt like a boy in shorts, except one that had a very loving partner and earned decent money in a big corporation. But I kind of still thought I was a kid.
yeah,
That did change things in that sense. Suddenly, I was responsible for another little kid.
yeah.
So I think it was just that realization that I think I was in my mid-30s, so still pretty young, and but it just gave me a sense of responsibility that I hadn't had before.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, and I love the barometer there of of instinctual, and I felt this and I felt that and I
Yeah.
felt the other. And I think that's obvious. That's the wonder of purpose, isn't it? Is that it's a felt
Yeah.
experience, and that when you start to become aware of that, poof, all of a sudden, things kind of shift massively.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you as you were kind of starting to talk
It's
about
fine.
how and where you made sense of it. Like where has it shown up for you? So becoming a parent was a significant moment.
Yeah, so I think that was the first one. And I think then I found the next couple of years. Now, how much of that was because my mind had shifted and how much of it was the environment thing? Because I was working for a while when Phoebe was born in quite a toxic environment. But I got to a point where I'd started my career in branches and then I'd moved into head office and built quite a successful career in that environment. But I remember getting to the point where I no longer had the ambition to move up in that environment. I just didn't want to do another round of strategy and planning, deal with all the politics. And I was quite fortunate that someone suggested that why don't you look at doing something else? And there were jobs going back in the branch network for area directors. So and they were looking to expand and reinvest in the network, get new types of leadership in there. And for me, it was a sideways move, but it just seemed really appealing to get leadership under my belt and to do
Yeah.
something different. It felt exciting. I went on a few branch visits and thought, oh my God, since I left the branches, nothing's changed. You could see the underinvestment. But I thought if I could go in there and actually have an impact and change things, and you then reconnect with how wonderful people in the front line are, just the stuff they deal with. So that's what I did. I threw my hat in for one of those jobs, got it, very, very excited. We then moved from Cheshire, where we'd been living, down to Bedfordshire, and I started as an area director in 2004 with I think it was something like at the time 16 branches, about 180 people, which was a big shift from before. I'd had a small team of about 6,
Yeah.
all kind of sitting around me in my head office, and they were kind of grads. They were but I had them around me, and most of what I did up until that point still was my output. What I got rewarded for was my output. Suddenly, I had to. Everything was done by other people.
Yeah.
And what happened was that for 3 months, it was absolutely brilliant. I just loved it. I was younger than most of my peers. I'd come from a different environment. I was fresh-faced and enthusiastic. I brought different things. They all thought I was great. And I just thought, this is amazing. What an experience. And it's just really easy, isn't it? You go around the branches and you sprinkle fairy dust and everyone thinks, oh, it's so good to have you really, And then after 3 months, I kind of had to deal with the reality of performance and how to get the best out of it. And I realized probably sometime after my team that I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Just didn't know.
Yeah.
And as performance started to drift and the things that I tried didn't work, and long story short, it was about 18 months in that first area, I was hopeless, really hopeless. And the worst thing about it now, I look back on it as obviously a very formative part of my career. The only thing I feel bad about, I feel bad for the people I led, because they were really good people and they just deserved and they needed better. And I look back now, it's almost one of the sort of genesis of my kind of, real strong feeling about what I do now is that we can't just leave leaders to just get on with it and hope they get it, because it's just unfair on the people they lead.
Yes.
So I was quite lucky. What happened with me is, first of all, people stuck with me. My boss, after about 14 months, suggested, well, why don't you go and just shadow a couple of other more experienced area directors? And I just spent a day with these 2 different characters, very different characters to me, different parts of the country. And I just watched what they did. And I'd spent the previous 14 months absorbing advice and templates and various other things which didn't work. But just seeing what people did and how they did it was a real game changer for me. And as I started to then kind of apply some of those things, it did start to have an impact. And then we had a restructure. So I moved to a different area and I was able to apply what I'd learned to perhaps leave behind some of the baggage. So that was more successful. We had another restructure after 9 months because we just restructured every sort of 9 to 18 months in the company. Well, it's Barclays, actually, the company I work for. And then I went to another area where, again, I was more successful still, but still wasn't the finished article. But there was a point actually through that, I was in a year in that area where I really stumbled across my purpose as a leader.
Okay.
I remember that we about 6 months in and we were doing pretty well, and we'd come from like really being a really poor performing area to sort of more middle of the pack and growing. And we had a recognition event where we got all the branches together. It was one Friday night, and it was just a really beautiful evening. There was so much excitement and belief and joy, and I guess, gratitude for the fact that we were there and now we're kind of here and people get positivity back. And I remember the following day thinking, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And this is why. It's not about where I am on the league tables of performance or what my boss thinks about me and bonuses and recognition to get. It's about seeing the impact I can have on people's lives. It was a really profound realization that I had that, this is such a privilege.
Yeah.
Such a privilege and obviously big responsibility.
Yeah.
I think from that point onwards, I just nailed my colours to the leadership path and thought, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do. And at that point, I wasn't even that good. I was constantly getting better, but it's like so in other words, I found my purpose as a leader. It by accident. I thought, this is what I want to do. So I went from seeing myself as being whatever, project manager, strategy and planning director, banker, to suddenly I saw myself as a leader. And that's what I then did for the next sort of 13, 14 years before I left the company.
There's something really interesting about that that kind of shift, Jeremy, in that there are lots of people out there who hold roles where kind of leadership is assigned because of the seniority or because there's a management of other people, and yet it can feel like a on the side of the desk element of a role, actually leading others, because there's a delivery responsibility, or there is some element of output that is required by them, which is first and foremost. But then the environment they create as a leader is almost secondary to that. And we both know that actually it's the other way around. Like, the leadership responsibility is to create the environment for other people to be able to thrive. And then if there's stuff that you need to do off the back of that, actually, if you've invested in the right place, your chances of being able to get to the high value things are evident. But a lot of the time people wrestle with that because it's the me versus others thing. And it sounds like this question around ambition and what does ambition mean to you, and this sense of it is about me and the journey I'm on, almost to an epiphanal moment of actually it's about service and service to others. Like, what am I contributing? Again, was kind of one of those moments of broadening, of seeing more than you saw before.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real epiphany. I remember distinctly where I was, who I was talking to, when it occurred to me, and it really felt like it. And it happened by accident. I mean, it may or may not have happened. But I think what you said is 100% right. And I think this is almost the tragedy of leadership, is that I've seen some research that says 82% of people are accidental managers. In other words, because they have strong technical skills, they get then assigned people. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the idea that you can just automatically, you wouldn't, say for example, you've been working your way up in a finance role, and then you become a finance director, and as part of that, you have to lead other finance people. Well, they wouldn't have you as a finance director without having done your ACCA or equivalent. You wouldn't say, right, there you go, there's all the numbers, off you go. You wouldn't do that. But they say, here's a bunch of people without any kind of training in how to manage and how to lead people, how to understand people. And what's worse is we almost then give people kind of management techniques, like, here's how you do things like disciplinary and grievance, here's how you deal with sickness, here's how you deal with performance management, but not how you deal with people. And that, for me, is the thing that's fundamentally lacking. And I was lucky that I was able to absorb that over many, many years by observing good leaders and experiencing good leadership, but also observing really bad leaders and experiencing bad leadership, and think, well, actually, that's what I should be doing, and that's what I shouldn't. But I think it amazes me that even to this day we carry on exactly the same.
Yeah, amazing. And I really love this idea of your openness and curiosity to what does good and bad look like, and a willingness to embrace those things, because that's often part of the same shift from self and trajectory to service and others, is a willingness to go, how am I at this? Like, what does this look like for me? And so one of the things I'm interested in is, you talked about, I found purpose, I found leadership purpose. So there almost feels like there's a separation there between purpose and leadership purpose. And I'm really, I have a perspective, but I'm really interested in that, and how you kind of make sense of those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, because clearly in a work environment, I decided that my purpose is to lead, and to lead as well as I possibly can, because that's what people deserve. I think the word you use about service is one that perhaps I didn't appreciate at the time. It sometimes gets mixed up with servant leadership, which is just something that's kind of banded out but rarely delivered. But I think this whole idea of a life of service is a very powerful one. But I think you're right, because if I reflect back, my life had a much broader purpose than that. It certainly has a broader purpose now. But at the time, I kind of really would define it through my work.
Yeah.
But it probably meant that the way I led my children as they were growing up wasn't as effective as how I led people at work.
Yeah.
I would perhaps treat my children in a way I would never dream of treating people at work, as in impatience and indifference. And, I say that with no pride, just reflection back on that time. And it's not that I wasn't a bad dad.
No.
But I know I could have been far better at times as they were growing up. So I think, I've probably found purpose in one particular aspect of my life. And I felt very, very kind of strong sense of responsibility to my wife at the time and my children. But perhaps not that same sense of purpose as I applied to work.
Yeah.
And that definitely has broadened in later life.
And I'm super keen to kind of explore how that's kind of shifted and changed, because I think for those that are listening, there are, horrifically bad development programs that will get people to focus time and effort on a leadership purpose. And it's so narrow and superficial in comparison to the richness of like genuine life experience and what purpose really can bring and means to people when we feel connected to what's meaningful to us and we understand the contribution that we're trying to make to those things and what that really looks like. So for you to be able to go, here it looked really clear, and actually even if I just take this sense of desire to lead and have and be in service of others, I was doing that really well in this context and not really intentionally paying attention to it over here. And if we had a different conversation, I said, what's more meaningful to you, your children or work? You'd go, my children, in a heartbeat, right? In an absolute heartbeat. So there's something really amazing about, and for people to kind of sit with that of, great, have clarity on why you are doing something in a particular context, but always remember you can step back from that context and still ask yourself that same question of, why am I doing this? And actually, the more you give yourself the opportunity to see the different perspective, the more actually there are things that connect the dots, right? There are things that link up.
See, I think listening to you, I'm just reflecting now. I think that it's really interesting. I don't think I've quite made this link before, but I think what I discovered the importance and the purpose of leading, my responsibility to the people I led. And I think the more I did that and the more I invested in it and sought feedback and observed what was happening, the better I got. There's no question. I don't think, though, that it was only when I really left the organisation in 2019 that I actually understood myself.
Yeah, okay.
I did. I thought I was really self-aware.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I was so lacking
amazing.
Awareness. And it meant sometimes I could be really in the moment and really get where things were coming from, but I had so many blind spots. And so I think one of the things I remember really thinking about quite a lot and was bringing into some of the work I did in my last few months at Barclays was the idea that, ultimately leadership is the impact, as we said earlier on, it's about the impact you have on other people and create an environment for them. So leading people is what it's all about. But in order to lead people, you have to be able to lead yourself. It starts with self-leadership. It starts with understanding your purpose, who you are, your values, what really matters to you, what you're really good at, what you're not so good at. When you're at your best and worst, without that understanding, you're kind of trying to give your best of people without really knowing what that is.
Yeah.
And I think I was surprised when I left and started to think differently and more broadly about life and what I wanted to do, just how little I'd been living, understanding my own values, living my purpose and adhering to that, and how many times I wasn't being myself.
Yes.
So I think that's really interesting, because I think that's one of the fundamental things I think for me, if you want to move into leadership and if you want to find your purpose, you've got to understand yourself. You've got to do some really quite tough work to really understand who you are
Yeah.
and be
And
honest about it.
I love that, because you can't disconnect parts of yourself and just an over index or over invest in one area and then not be a cost or consequence show up
Yeah,
somewhere else, right? And so
yeah,
the very fact that you are a leader, it's a role that you're playing, but the way in which you embody and inhabit that role comes from somewhere.
yes,
And there's either an intentional choice or an unconscious choice about what that looks like. And the amount of work there is around authentic leadership, etc., etc. All we're really talking about is, who are you and what do you care about, and
yeah,
how is that showing up for you? And
yeah,
the more you know that, the more you can go to a place of um of sincerity in those
yeah.
interactions. And we all know that those that you lead can smell the bullshit a
Oh,
million miles away.
oh, totally. Totally. I don't know who had the quote. A quote I often use, which I love, which is that it's better to be authentic than impressive.
Yeah,
And I've seen so many impressive people where I
yeah,
just go,
yeah.
no,
Yeah, it doesn't sit quite well.
yeah,
So talk to us about this kind of moment of deciding to step away from
yeah,
the organization, because the work that you do now and the leadership you bring to the world right now around kind of gender unity and gender advocacy, and kind of leadership more broadly. Like, how did that come about? Like, before we
yeah,
get into that work, how did that
yeah.
come about?
Well, I think I was. There's definitely a combination of factors. So I worked overseas for about 3 years between end of 2013 and beginning of 2017. My family and I all went over to. We actually where we worked. I might just say it was Mauritius. So
Terrible, shocking.
it was a harsh location, and we spent 3 years on that beautiful island, and I ran the retail business for Barclays. That's what I did, and it was without question the best work experience in my life, and as a life experience, it was transformative for me in many ways. So incredible. And I came back, and we had to come back for a number of personal reasons. My daughter was very ill. There were lots of things going on, and it was a really tough year personally in 2017. But I worked for this amazing leader called Rebecca, who just, inspired me. She cared for me. She nurtured me. She rewarded my efforts. She made me feel psychologically safe. She supported all the things I had to kind of deal with in my personal life. And I had a great year. I had a really great year. And the following year, she left at the end of that year, and I worked for her boss. And it was like stepping from sunshine into driving rain. Just the
Uh,
difference in
yeah.
culture and environment. There's many more things I can say, but this is a decent podcast. I feel. But what it made me think about was that how arbitrary leadership is, even in a big organization where I was a 25-year veteran at that point. I knew my way around leadership. I'd led big
Yeah.
teams myself. And to go from such a brilliant experience to such a terrible experience, just because I was doing broadly the same role, a bit more
Yeah.
responsibility. So that made me think, and I was quite fortunate to be kind of rescued by one of my previous bosses who says, rather than waste your time doing that, come and work for me on a secondment. And I ended up being head of colleague engagement for the branch network. So it was like, oh my God, it was a kind of job I dream of. Like looking after 10,000 people, trying to create their better engagement for them. It's wonderful. But as I was then, after that period in that secondment, I was asked to write my job description to make it permanent. I just couldn't get excited about it.
Yeah.
I think what I realized, there was a number of factors. I was nudging 50, makes you think about kind of what you want to do the rest of your life. And I no longer felt connected to the purpose of the organization, but fundamentally, with a few exceptions, I didn't believe in the leadership of the
Yeah.
organization. And I just thought, do I want to do another 10 years earning decent money and just kind of hang on, or do I
Yeah.
want to do something else in my life? And when I really evaluated it, it was a very easy choice. So
Mm.
that's the kind of a combination of reasons why I left. I didn't really know what I was going to do,
Yeah.
if I'm honest. But what I did feel I wanted to do, I thought leadership's my thing. That's what I love. I'd love to do more leadership myself. Maybe not in a big organization, but perhaps do interim jobs or even just help and support the leaders. I wasn't really sure. But I spent 6 months of just having time off and just thinking about it. And that's when I then created YLead. That's when I then created my company during the pandemic. because I just wanted to help out other leaders lead with purpose, find their why as a leader, and then sort of go from that.
Yeah, amazing. And there's a number of things that I'm really like really connect with me. One is when you decided to take a step back and think about the choices that you were making. There's almost this inflection point.
Yeah.
Actually, going into the unknown felt really easy. Well, I say relatively easy, because actually the alternative just didn't have that same emotional. There wasn't the same emotional conviction. So a willingness to kind of step into the unknown, which, like we talk and we hear a lot about certainty and the need for certainty and the role that certainty plays in kind of risk aversion, and how that shapes everything from economy to political will to social interaction. And yet there are moments where human beings can quite comfortably go into uncertainty when there is a feeling of disconnection or engagement in something different.
Yeah.
So what was it that you talked about, the kind of the leadership, and you talked about kind of excitement around the role, but you were talking about kind of weighing up or calibrating your choice. What, beyond the kind of the tactical of the organization itself, what were some of the things that you were seeking or felt absent in terms of that calibration?
It's really interesting the way you framed it, because that's you're absolutely right. If I'd applied logic to it, I would still be there now. I mean, I was earning decent money. Every single year you'd get like a sort of a bit of extra money for a bonus. My pension was being paid, and I was good enough to have done it for another 10 years. I might have eventually got tapped on the shoulder, but probably not, because I was also someone through my career, I'd always been able to kind of reinvent myself. If I got a bit bored or got a bit complacent, I'd try something else and would get there. So I wasn't someone that was stuck. I'd always able to find new things to do. So logic said, you stay. Absolutely. But I think it was that point around I look back now with even more clarity, but I just felt constrained. I felt constrained by the organization's views of me and the perhaps limitations they placed on me, the way I'd been pigeonholed over the years. I felt constrained by the fact I didn't really believe in a lot of the things the organization was doing, and believe in some of the more, the influential people around me. And when I looked outside, it just felt so much more expansive. There's a whole range of possibilities that I didn't really know whether I could do them or not. And I remember seeing a brilliant TED talk. I wish I could remember who it was by, but where it talked about what motivates people, and how it's fear that keeps us in place, but it's the potential of a gain, even if it's not really that clear what it is, that moves people forward. And I really remember thinking that fear could have kept me in place really easily, but I just thought, no, actually, I'll probably be okay. There's all these different things I could probably do, and I started to move towards those. It was just so much more appealing.
I love the language as well. I think there's something really powerful in just being able to hold the tension between constraint and expansion. And how that influenced your state to be able to go, I don't want to be constrained. I don't want to be limited. I don't want to be narrowed. I want possibility. I want opportunity. And I even know what those are, but it feels like they're over there and not over here.
Exactly. I remember the boss that rescued me, and I use that word deliberately because he really did sort of help me out of a difficult position. And I'd worked for him previously, and he was amazing. I mean, a real maverick. But when I told him my decision, I thought he might be a little disappointed, but he just said, mate, I'm really proud of you for making that decision. You can do so much more than you can ever do in this organization. It's brilliant. And anything I can do to help, just let me know. But it was really quite affirmative. But that's what I remember thinking, is that there's just more I could do, even though I don't quite know what that is. There's more I can do than the environment I'm in. And I think what's happened over the last 5 years, without jumping ahead too much, is that I can't believe if you told me that I'd be able to do the things I'm doing now and feel the way I do about them, I wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done. And one thing it's really important to say is that the value I gained from those 27 years, the kind of the experiences, the hard knocks, some of the scars that come with it, all of that is incredibly useful because I can apply that now. I've seen many things that perhaps a lot of people don't from working in that big organization in a variety of roles. So it undeniably was helpful for me, but I definitely left at the right time.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Not a minute too late or a minute too soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was just right. It just felt
lucky, quite lucky.
Yeah. Amazing. And so talk to us about how that's then shaped where you are now and the work that you've been doing over the last 5 years. Because if somebody just looked from the outside in, they would go, "Wow, this guy is massively fueled by purpose." Just given the topics that you're kind of going after and the things that you're trying to influence. But how did that evolve then from this no freaking clue to totally on mission?
I know. Well, what happened was, first of all, I joined a learning consultancy at the beginning of 2020 because I was approached by one of their directors I've worked with many years before and said, "We're looking to expand. We want to get some fresh ideas. Could you come in?" And so I thought, yeah, that should be good. So I spent about 3 months with them, and a couple of things happened. The first thing was it didn't feel to me like that organisation had wanted to do perhaps the work to match the verbals of the otherwise make the changes required to realise the ambition. So I was kind of thinking, I'm not quite sure this is for me. But most importantly, what happened to the pandemic?
Yeah.
So that kind of brought things to a natural close there. And I then spent the next 9 months really working out what I wanted YLead to be. I wrote a Jerry Maguire style mission statement, which was very cathartic. But it just kind of made me think again about what impact do I want to have on the world in a way that I'd always been quite incremental. Nature working for a big organization, where suddenly I was like, I could change the world in this way.
Yeah.
And so that was the job in 2020. In 2021, I started trading and doing, just picking up some clients very slowly. I mean, it takes a while, as I'm sure you know.
Yep.
And then in 2022, I started to do more interesting work as I developed. But it's always been about leadership and inclusive leadership and aspects of leadership. Most of my work has been around that. And that still is what the company is about. It's, YLead is about helping leaders find their purpose, but actually I want leadership to have a positive impact on the world. I want it to have a positive impact on organizations and on society. One day, perhaps in governments, compared to the shit show we're experiencing around the world at the moment.
Yeah,
that's kind of the ultimate mission. But the thing that's made me do what I'm doing now, and the two are kind of linked ultimately, but the work around gender was really inspired by a very tragic event, which I'm sure you remember, when Sarah Everard was abducted, raped and murdered by a police officer. And I was as shocked by most people would be about what actually happened, but I was also struck by the outpouring of sort of anger and frustration by women, quite naturally. Well, how can we ever be safe if this can happen? And I spoke to quite a few women at the time. One was someone I was working with, and I said to her, I feel really helpless and I'm quite frustrated. What can I do? I'd like to do more. What can I do to be a better male ally? And she just simply said to me, well, read 2 books. And the 2 books were Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates and Invisible Women by Caroline Crowder Perez. And I read them both. And if I'm honest, James, they blew my mind. I realized that I was about half a century behind me, and yet I didn't really have a clue about how 51% of the global population experienced the world, just from reading those 2 books. I knew sexism existed, but I had no idea of the sheer scale of just daily how it impacts women and girls.
Yeah.
And then, Caroline's book, the amount of data biases that impact women in a world designed by men for men is just extraordinary.
Yeah.
So I read those 2 books, and what that did is it really ignited my curiosity. I thought, I didn't know this, so I want to know more. And one of the things I've always thought about leadership is that if you have a lot of privilege, leadership is a privilege, so it comes with responsibility. I think it was a quote by Spider-Man, but I've always
great power.
Yeah,
great power because great responsibility. Yeah, Uncle Ben said that.
So the same I think applies to me, because I do have a lot of privilege. From the color of my skin to I had a good education. The fact that I'm a male. There's lots of things that are in my favor, and I don't feel guilty about those. But I think because of that privilege, it gives me a greater responsibility to use it to benefit others. So I've read many more books, and I've spoken to hundreds of women around the world, and I'm not an expert in the female experience, never will be, but I do sleep less stupid now.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I want to share what I'm learning with others, because I'm just struck by the inequities. And back to something we were saying earlier on about me not really understanding myself. I realised in sort of the months after I left Barclays, I started to really understand what my values were. One of which is fairness. And as a kid, I would have tantrums when things weren't fair. But even in work, I would have kind of more grown-up tantrums where I felt that things weren't fair for either me or my team. I'd have a visceral reaction. So that's always been running through my core. So when I see unfairness, I want to do something about it. And I think I'm in a position where I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so that has been a real passion for me in the last sort of 4 years or so as I've learned to become more educated. And it took me probably a couple of years before I started to actually vocalize that and write about it and do what I'm doing now effectively.
Yeah. And you've used the word responsibility about 7 times in the 39 minutes that we've
Must
been
be another value.
talking.
I don't know, maybe.
But I think there's something in the work that we do where we're really interested in helping people understand how and where they assign meaning to things, because purpose is an output, right? It's a consequence of some stuff. Like happiness is the consequence of some stuff.
Yes.
It's actually not the thing itself. You have to kind of do the work to find the
Yes.
stuff, and then as a consequence you get. And so where and how do we find? And so you talking about responsibility, seeing responsibility, feeling responsibility, but acting on responsibility feels like really meaningful to you in any of the contexts that you kind of sit within. And what's really exciting when I listen to you talk about that is I'm curious to understand more, and then when I understand more, I'm motivated to kind of intervene, to do some stuff. And I totally agree with you around what the kind of the way in which privilege should come with responsibility, and it's not about being ashamed about that. It is actually about just seeing and understanding it and using it with intent. And I don't know. I don't want to necessarily take us down a rabbit hole or go off on one here, but I'm having a massive reaction to Trump and to Musk and to Andrew Tate and the manosphere and all of those things at the moment, in that all of it is about going backwards to find some kind of certainty, as we talked about before, that actually is really disruptive because it's just antiquated. And so people are so desperate to go, and when I say people, I'm talking about men, young men, old men, so desperate to understand their place in the world that they're wanting to go back to something that they understand because at least they understand it. And in actual fact, the work to be done is we have a place, that we have a voice there. And I say we because I'm a white man and you're a white man. Like, we have a critical voice in enabling all of the other voices, and for everybody to be heard in a way that allows more things to be possible, not going backwards to some bullshit state of control that is limiting. And so there's something really wonderful here about what does responsibility actually look like in this context, and responsibility that makes more things possible, that isn't reductionist in nature. And so how are you finding that now in the work that you're doing and the places that you're going? Where are you seeing not only the possibility, but the tension of disruption? Like, how is that playing out?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting experience for me because I sort of find myself in the kind of leadership was always my thing, and I find myself now in the kind of often placed in the DEI bracket, which I don't mind, but it wasn't the intention. And so when you find yourself in that position, as I've done for the last 2 years, it's been a bit like trying to catch a falling knife, because as much as we're trying to make progress, so much is being eroded and rolled back. My simple view of it, this is basically the patriarchy fighting back, which was inevitable, this kind of backlash. But we've got to sort of deal with that. But I think there's a number of things that what you said about our demographic profile. Yes, it does give us a lot of privilege. One of the things that since I first started talking about gender equity, sharing what I've learned about different things I just didn't know for the first 51 years of my life, the amount of women that have come up to me and you said they appreciate me talking about it. That's one thing, because when I talk about it, I'm far more likely to be listened to by the people with the power and influence, far more likely to be. I've also had spoken to many women, and I totally agree with them, who says it makes them feel a bit ick as well.
Yeah.
It takes that. It takes. Now, there's a number of ways of looking at it. On the one hand, yes, I mean, what do I know? I was flying blind for 51 years, and now I've educated myself, so I know a bit more, so I can talk about it, and people will then listen and go, "Oh, that's really." When women have been saying this for decades, I guess when it comes to privilege, though, one of the privileges that I have that a lot of women that I speak to and speak about these things don't have is I haven't experienced decades of being ignored and being interrupted and past trauma from really bad experiences. I don't have that. So when I talk about these topics, I'm talking about something I've learned, that I'm fascinated by, that I want to do something with. It's a very positive experience for me.
Yeah.
It often isn't for other people because they're the victims of the situation. So I feel quite conflicted about it, but I've accepted now. It almost like makes me want to double down on, I've got all of this privilege, and that does come with much richer, for the eighth time, responsibility to use that and to. But then again, on the other thing I often think about is it shouldn't be about me. There's a fine line you tread in this kind of world between, using your voice in a positive way, but actually taking over like some kind of hero, trying to save women, and that is definitely
because that ultimately perpetuates the patriarchy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think what's wonderful about this, Jeremy, is that your willingness to see the self and others, right, which is the same as you kind of moving into that leadership role and having an epiphany of, hey, ambition was about me and it's the next step, and actually it's about service to others, but that's a constant tension, in the same way that you described you can't lead others until you're leading yourself. So it's never an either or, is it? It's always the both and, in the same way that you being willing to stand up and say, hey, I don't know some stuff, but I've learned some stuff, and here's some stuff you need to hear, and you're probably going to hear it from me, so let's have it, whether you like it or not. And go, but I need to be part of something because it's ultimately not about me. Like that, seeing that tension and being willing to hold that tension is often where the value is created, right? Like we never get it if we're just either end of the spectrum. We need to kind of be in the paradox and be able to hold the paradox, or even collapse the paradox and generate something new. So there's something really wonderful about that. But I'm also interested, like, what does this then mean now when you look forward and you're thinking more about the kind of the leaps of faith and the areas of impact and the work that you want to do? Like, there has been an evolution in this service of others and how and where you bring that to the world. What does it look like when you start to look forward? What's the next steps around this work and into the future for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think when I set up YLead, it was never to make money. I mean, I need to earn a living. But I do realize that if I wanted to have the impact that I wanted to have, which is a seismic one on leadership and the impact that has, then I need to be more expansive in my thinking about it, be much more strategic about how I run the business. I started writing posts on LinkedIn about 2 years ago now, under the heading on Wednesdays We Smash the Patriarchy. And it started off because my daughter's got a T-shirt that said on Wednesdays We Smash the Patriarchy. So I persuaded her to let me do a post about her and her T-shirt. And it got quite well received. So the following week, I followed up by saying, actually, here's all the ways that patriarchy impacts women. The week after, I wrote about how it impacts men, and I've just continued since then. And what that's created, I do feel, is a little bit of a movement, because the amount of people that are now engaged in my posts compared to just 2 years ago has risen exponentially. But the most beautiful thing is, I think it's created a community, and I'm learning all the time, and we're learning from each other. So I feel that that's an opportunity that's being created that I need to leverage and think, so how can I now take that, which provides people with insights and knowledge and a sense of community, but also a bit of hope in some cases, because it's not just the same people talking about this, it's people that look like me.
Yeah.
How can we utilize that to actually make a real difference? And it's never been more important, bearing in mind what is happening in the US and places like Afghanistan. And it's not as though we're an exemplar in the UK or in Western Europe. But, the fact that the progress we're making towards gender equity has gone back in the last year. It was in 2023, we're 131 years away from gender equity, and now it's 134 years. So we've actually getting backwards now. So there has to be some big movements to take place to counteract what's happening and to accelerate progress. So I don't have all the answers, but I really feel that I perhaps need to be a little bit more provocative in what I'm doing, and I need to expand the message more widely, and get in organisations' faces a little bit more than I've done previously. So yeah, I want it to have a genuine impact. And I guess to counterbalance the people that are taking up all the airtime at the moment. You mentioned Trump, you mentioned Musk, that Andrew Tate. These people who come in and they see a blind spot and a weak spot, and they've made the most of it.
Exploited it. Yeah, exploited it.
I think about young men and boys, and the fact that they are feeling so disenfranchised is a tragedy.
Yeah.
But what are we providing to them as an alternative?
Yeah.
And so we need to provide more positive, role models of what being a man is, of a masculinity, of their place in the world.
Yeah.
And rather than division, create more unity in the way we talk about these things.
Yeah, massively. I feel like this element of our conversation may just kind of spawn into a deeper conversation offline, actually, because there's the kind of the desire to create something more positive for young men to aspire to, and to be able to evolve into a future that feels more hopeful for everybody is just, I think that is worthwhile life's work. So I think we should 100% explore that off after the provocation of this conversation. But I guess, Jeremy, I want to pause there actually, and just thank you for being willing to share openly about the wrestles that you've had about kind of finding purpose in the different things that you've done and where you've done it and how you've done it, and just the extraordinary evolution that you can go through from being a banker to driving, gender equity and the kind of the agenda around that in the world, and the wrestle between focusing in on that in a professional context, and yet it is your daughter who inspired a thing that's going to create the movement, and knowing and seeing that actually I just was over indexing in one place for a while, and that wasn't what actually really felt purposeful to me in the kind of the broader context. And look where it's landed you. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So thank you for being willing to share that and bring that to the Excitable Soul podcast. It's been awesome.
It's been a real pleasure, James. Love talking to you, mate. And would look forward to that offline conversation as well. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. We appreciate your support and would love you to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend if you can. It makes a massive difference. Equally, if you're interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your unique sense of purpose, or that of your teams, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.